All right, guys, welcome to Monday night. Thank you again so much to Alvin for worship, again for the third week in a
Straight
row.
fire.
It never gets old.
Never does.
We are in our third week of our series. We are just getting started. And as a community, so you saw me and Brad the first week, Yasmin last week, which was so powerful. And Sammy's here today. And we're just continuing the conversation on how we, as a circuit rider community, are responding and will continue to respond to this conversation on racism. Today, we probably want to get into a little bit more of the practicals of how we are going to have conversations and how we will continue to address racism going forward. And so I got my friend Sammy here today. Like I said, we'll go into the Bible. We'll go into some practicals. I'm just excited to continue this conversation. I think it is necessary. We've been having it before this series. Like we said, we'll continue to have it. I think one of the things that I want to just lead off with is a few years ago, we started developing, between Brad and myself, just ways that we have conversations.
Yeah, it's good.
Because I think it's important, because there's so many different tones and different ways people have conversations
it's real, bro.
now.
It's real.
People can get very offended, get very loud.
Like myself, but God is good.
But we just wanted to at least lead off with how we have conversations. And I want to go, and we can unpack them a little bit more later. But I also want to hear from you. Any thoughts that you have to lead off? But we have 4 pillars for our conversations. One, of course, is listening. You have to do that to have a conversation.
Very important.
Mercy, and we can, like I said, unpack that a little bit more. Empowerment. Which is very key. And the 4th one, I'm forgetting right now, is...
Was it hope? What was it?
Joy.
Hope is the bonus fit.
We'll end with hope today.
Yeah, we're going to end with hope for sure.
Joy.
Yeah.
Which I think is also a very important ingredient in the conversation. I'll unpack that as well. But do you have any thoughts for us leading up?
Yeah, I think, obviously, third week, we're just getting started. When we got to talk together, obviously, even this last week, Yasmin we could talk about her talk from last week this whole time, take the whole time. So she just in a beautiful, just grace-filled, but such truth-filled way. I think her revelation of, being at the tomb, there's so many things we could talk, but we wanted to take this third week, and just so you know, too, is, again, if you haven't watched the first 2, they're all on Circuit Riders. Series title, we're just getting started, because a lot of times we enter in, if you're not a minority or a part of the Black community, let's say specifically if you're white, you enter into this race conversation, racism, and it's you've carried it for a month, and you're like, okay, maybe 2 months, maybe now's the time to can we move on? But it's not a thing that we're moving on from until we see change. And so I think that why I'm saying all that is that even for myself, right, being half Latino, half white, and then just in a place of myself. So even as we're having this conversation, I'm going to lean a ton in, obviously, to John, but I'm also at a place where we're going to share our thoughts, and we're going to probably dive into this in a bit. But it's okay that as we go forward, we even change our perspective. That people have changed their opinion. But I think what we want to do is we want to get real practical. Because I think Brad and John was so beautiful. Yasmin was incredible. And so right now we want to talk about some real practical things where we could see change. And so before we jump in, I wanted to look, the power that I felt was on, like you were saying, is on conversation. And I was talking with the pastor in the city of LA. And why I'm saying all that in my intro is that this conversation is for our circuit riders, and we're kind of opening it up to the public, but we're saying as circuit riders, as for me and my house, right, we will not be racist. You know what I'm saying? That's what we're saying. And we're inviting everyone into that conversation. But what we felt, and even what you just unpacked, even with the couch and how, we do this, is that there's power in conversation. And so, but there's a difference. We're talking about not a discussion, but dialogue. And let me tell you why. Because a discussion, the root word for discussion is to be struck apart. It's actually to divide. So if you go into, especially with the energy that's on this conversation, from the offense to the pain to the trauma, we're talking about so much history. You could go in with a discussion mindset, and you're trying to win an argument. You're dividing, but we're not coming here to discuss. We're coming here to have a dialogue. And here's what's cool about dialogue: the root word of dialogue is to think together in relationship.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
That's good.
And so I just think I'm going to pass it back to you, because the Bible verse that we really want to hit is, where is it? It's here. 14. 89:14, Psalms. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Steadfast love and faithfulness go before you. And one of the pastors, doctors, Dr. Sims, he shared that with us. And it was about, sometimes as Christians, we so fight for righteousness, which we're going to, but justice, just with righteousness, is a foundation. Yeah. And we got to fight for that. So I'm excited. Again, I just want you to know, I don't have the corner on this conversation, but I am going to trumpet my voice for the rest of my life to be like, we're sick and tired of any way that racism is at all alive in our life. We're going to root it out. So
I love that verse. I think that it's one that we've been referencing since we heard it from Dr. Sims. And I think it's important, too, to recognize that, one, that it says righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne.
Yeah.
I think a part of being committed to justice is remembering all the justice, but injustice that we've seen 100%. In our nation. And so I think even to the biblical, not just principle, but command to remember, I think it's very important that because I think in times like these, we want to forget.
That's real.
And we want to move on.
That's real.
We want to just talk about the future. What can we be,
Right.
But so often we're instructed in Scripture to set up a monument, a pillar in remembrance of a moment. And I think it's so important to reach back in time, to go back in time, and to look at what the world has been and what potential and capacity that we have now. Yeah. And say we won't live like that. Right. We won't do that, or we will do that. We will 100%. Live like that. But it's important to look back and to remember. And so I think in any way that we want to just do away with the past. Right. And with the sins of the past, I think we are more connected to those things than we are aware of, Yeah. And so it's important just to look back and say, okay, let's study this so that we do not make the same mistakes, Bro,
that's 100%. Even the verse that John's referencing is in the book of Joshua, right? They had them set up these stones of remembrance. So when the generations would ask, why are they here? They would remember that the God of, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob delivered them from Egypt and crossed them, not only the Red Sea, but the Jordan. And so it was about remembering. And what happened in the book of Judges is that the people forgot their past. And so they gave themselves to idolatry. They gave themselves to all these things. And so I think, though, it's profound what you said, is it's easy to forget the bad things or not even look at the bad things in our past and just remember the good. But the truth is that if we push that off, then we're prone to reproduce that in the context and conversation of racism, both, like we say, overtly or covertly. And so I think we have to look at our past and look at the places where, as a nation, as even the church, right, that we've brought pain. And we go, listen, it's not that I'm anti that, but what I'm going to say is I'm going to address that so that I never repeat that cycle again.
Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah.
Maybe we can get into, the pillars first.
Let's do it.
Conversation, you want to do that?
Yeah.
I feel like let's start with listening.
Yeah.
Because I think, it's pretty, when you think of conversation, that's probably one of the first words that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Comes to mind is listening to, me listening to you, or vice versa.
Right.
But I think it's a little bit more intentional, than what we've given it off to be.
100%.
Because a lot of times in conversation, listening kind of looks like just waiting until you're done, so I can
like thinking of my points. You know what I'm saying? So you're like, that was good, but really,
Yeah, exactly. But I really do feel like listening, and what I see modeled in the life of Jesus is rooted in humility,
100%.
and is rooted in like submission to whoever you're talking to.
Yeah.
Which I found so interesting about Jesus, who knew everything,
Yeah, it's real.
He was 100% God, and so he wasn't lacking in power, he wasn't lacking in authority, and definitely wasn't lacking in a voice.
No way.
But oftentimes he, either asked questions.
Yeah.
He heard people out. He listened to people. He allowed people to speak.
Yeah.
And his ministry a lot of times looks like you were saying, dialogue.
Right.
And so I think it is very important to enter into conversations with humility and to say, I may have all the answers in the world, or at least I think I do,
Yeah, you got a lot of good answers, John. I just want to let you know that.
But in every moment, I want to go into every conversation, like
100%.
leaning in and saying, okay, what can you teach me today?
It's good, bro.
And even if you can't teach me anything, I want to give space, for you to say something new that you haven't said before.
It's good, bro.
To come up with your own revelations. We see God make space for people to prophesy, and to own a certain truth.
Yeah.
I think we need to make space, and that's, to me, that's what listening looks like.
It's good, bro. I think everything you're saying is, true listening, right? And what we like to call as circuit riders, active listening, right, requires humility. Because if you're humble, then you're going to desire to learn from anyone. Where you can learn from someone who is a genius in your mind, you can learn from an 80-year-old or an 8-year-old. So if you're looking at an outlook of, man, I just want to truly listen, which leads to our second point, which we'll go into in a second, of learning. But true listening is, if we come in humility, then we're going to be excited to listen to anyone, right? Yeah. And then I think that's the posture of the person, right? Because here's the thing is, I say this all the time too, is all of us truly want to be heard by the people we want to hear us, right? So like, even a lot of, shout out my wife, she's in the room, but a lot of our fights, right? Because we're not perfect, we're not that perfect Christian couple, but a lot of our, we're pretty close. But our fights is because it's always my fault. Just kidding, no, but it's because one of us isn't listening, probably me. And we think we are, but we're not being humble to listen. And that's the truth, is if I enter in, I want in every room I go into, I want to be heard, but that's not going to happen. But the truth is, every room I go into, I can listen. Yeah. Right? And then on the flip side of that, and then we're going to take this into the race conversation, racism, is on the flip side, we want to listen to people, and it's almost like we want them to be perfect. Yeah. Or at least up to our standards. Yeah. And if we disagree with them, or if we don't think they're packaged right, or maybe they're not even a believer, we're like, well, I don't know. But God, right? We look all through the scripture where God raised up people and used people. And it's like, if we could listen, it doesn't mean that we have to add in all of their beliefs, but if we could truly listen and not have to have them be perfect, I think we could change. Yeah. And then my question for you on this is, because I think, again, when we talk on the context of even racism, right? I think one thing I told John Paul, and tell me if this is where we could go or not, you let me know. But one thing I told John Paul was, everything is about power, right? But on the conversation of race and racism, like again, so half Latino, half white, right? So, but as a white person specifically, right, to our Circle Rider fam who's white, if you're white watching, I love you. Don't get offended by anything I say, because I'm not offended either. But this will never be a conversation that we have a seat of power. And let me explain. And again, I'm not saying we're going to conversate together. We're dialoguing here, all this stuff. But in the midst, if I'm talking, again, let me just explain. If I'm talking about the black community and the black experience, what's it like to grow up as a black male? Am I going to tell John, hey, John, so growing up, as a black male, I just want to let you know, no, that's not what I'm going to do. I am always going to lean in to John, because I want to listen in. And so I think a lot of times, even as this conversation is coming up, and we're even searching our hearts, and I'm searching my heart for like, man, do I have racism there? Do I have any of that junk there, where instead of it being looked at as like a word that is almost, what do we say? What do we talk about when people look at that word as what's it called? I'm blanking. Like it's almost like they don't want to hear it versus they could get rid of it. Does that make sense? Like, like it's almost like they, it's so sensitive to it. But really the truth is we need to get rid of it. And so in the same way, what I'm talking about in the place of power is that this context, even in listening, what I'm championing my friends, my family, myself first is I want to listen. Yeah. And I truly don't want to come in. And so we see a lot of leaders where they're like, okay, this conversation's important. And then they have the conversation, but they have it in a place of power, right? And then even in the way that they're stewarding it, it's coming as if they have the corner of the curb on this context. But the truth is, I think when we say we're just getting started, we're saying we're not just signing up. I'm not just signing up to listen for a week, a month. I'm signing up to listen for the rest of my life as my first posture in this conversation.
Yeah. I think this was a point we actually hit a couple weeks ago about the God that we serve, the Jesus that we're familiar with, isn't a God that is not familiar with our pain.
It's good, bro.
And so, again, 100% God, but in humility submitted himself to the pain of like an entire people, and again, could have exerted his power, could have been one who like just said, this is what I want. This is how this is how the world is going to be. Instead, he went the opposite and became fully human.
Wow. And
in that, like, understood, sympathized, and like dealt with the pain that we go through, And so, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. I know you've had this thought on like lending your privilege, But I think like lending or submitting your power and like giving your power away and being fully immersed in someone else's pain and someone else's trouble. And even learning what that feels like, what that means, and how another person, we talk about like putting someone else's shoes on.
It's good, bro.
But that whole idea of not just sympathizing with someone's pain, but becoming it, and understanding it in a more like proximate and familiar way. Yeah. That's the God that we serve, and that's also the God who is our model,
That's good.
And so I think in a lot of ways, again, and it's such the American way, is like to always have our platform and our voice and our,
that's real.
This or that.
That's
but
real.
The kingdom way has always been the complete opposite.
Yeah,
it's been to submit ourselves and to say, I may not even understand fully what you're going through. Yeah. And I feel like that was even a thought that God had, is like, from this, we are at odds and we are disconnected. My way is to now become so close to you and so familiar with you that I understand your pain and what you're going through. It might be so that God did not have language for the pain of men. And so his way was to come and to be so close to us and understand it.
Wow.
And bring a solution from that way.
Wow.
And not from outside of, the circle, not from outside of the pain, but right in the middle of it.
Wow.
And he spent time and investment with the people, to understand that pain. And so I think that is the challenge.
Yeah.
Is to say, in every way that this American system has given you power and given you a voice and given you a platform, the kingdom way now is to submit that, in humility, and to say, I'm going to learn the experience of someone else.
Wow. Yeah, and I think those 2 points you hit on, John, is right. So the first one, if we're talking about practical, and so this is what I felt the Lord told me, and I'm always down to upgrade my language. I always want to do all that, but I really felt super simple. What we talked about, the power on the conversation, and that we need to listen. Point one, we need to learn. Point two, and the third one is we need to lend our privilege. And I think the first, right? So when we're talking about, we're just getting started. When we're talking about all this stuff with racism, and we're going to hit on white privilege and even systemic racism and Jim Crow, all these things that we need to specifically. And when I say I'm speaking specifically even to everyone, but to the white community. It's very important for us to be educated in those things. So I would say the first point, even listen practically, is could we listen to the black community?
Yeah.
And not only the ones that like, we find voices that we feel like are more not tolerable, but like that we relate more to?
Yeah.
Can
Doesn't cause us to change.
Yeah, and can we listen and have conversation, even whatever that is? Can we do that? And specifically when we're talking about racism, specifically when we're talking about a statement like Black Lives Matter, we're saying as Christians, that is the most biblical statement, like that's in there. That's in the Bible, because that's Jesus, right? I'm going to just allude to it. I won't go to it, but Luke 15, 100 sheep, one went away, right? Yeah. Said Jesus went after the one. 10 coins, the woman looked for one and left the other 9. 2 sons, the father reached out and threw a party for the youngest son. We're declaring that for a community, for a people that have had so much oppression, right? And so many stuff, we're declaring as Christians, hey, Black Lives Matter, and we're with you. So the first one I would say is listen to the Black community. It's super simple. Before we give our point, can I listen first? Yeah. And then the second, which you just hit on, is learn. And we talked about this. John's always resourcing me, so many of my other friends, is what books are you reading? Mm-hmm. Even look at this last week. Look at this last month. Look at this last year. If you're a reader, how many of those books were written by Black authors? Yeah. By Latino authors, right? How many of your podcasts, what you're watching, right? Outside of, again, we always say that we like in some ways the Black culture, but as far as Black history and Black people, we're not championing as well. How much are we learning and intaking in that way? Which again, I think leads us and educates us to that third point. Would you say?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's really good. Kind of hit on mercy.
Yeah.
I think this one is really important because I've seen the world is just so chaotic right now, and there's 2020. So many opinions, and everybody's pain is like being processed simultaneously,
It's real.
And so I think what I've been watching is so many people retreating into like self-loathing and like defense.
Yeah.
Everybody's like under their shell now.
Yeah.
And anything that we say is just in defense of, who we are, And so I think in order to truly listen and understand someone else's pain, we have to, again, lead with a very healthy level of mercy.
That's good, bro.
In our conversations.
Yeah.
Because I think when someone brings up their own pain, they may say it 10 to 15 different ways,
Yeah.
And in ways that may offend the listener.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some people have so much grace and like rise above their pain and like don't have, can say it in the nicest way, but that is not the general population.
Yes. That's real.
But I think there still is a way for us to lean into someone's pain no matter how it's said.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think if we, and this is a challenge that I've given, myself first.
That's good, bro.
And that I've given our circuit rider community, our couch community. Like this is a practice that we actively try to implement.
Yeah. Is
to say that I am going to be offended by something that you say,
Right.
And Brad may say something really stupid,
Come on, Brad. I'm just kidding.
But if I go in assuming that is going to happen, it is a lot easier to take it in, to know that we are all being perfected, that we are all a level of broken, and so I think if we can lead with, okay, I'm choosing mercy now.
Yep.
Brad's walking in the door now.
Yep.
We haven't started a conversation yet, but at the forefront of my mind is mercy for whatever you have to say.
Yeah.
I think whatever is said after that, we can hear, and learn from.
Yeah.
And again, be familiar with someone else's experience.
And I would say this too, and correct me if I'm wrong. That mercy outlook, that's for all of us, for sure. But I feel like it's even towards the people that experience pain and trauma.
Yeah.
Would you say that?
For sure.
Like it's almost like in many ways, like it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be angry, like you said. It doesn't mean that we can't have emotion.
Right.
Like we have to have a healthy, relationship, like our boy David said, with anger and with frustration. But But that mercy context is almost even more, I would say, even harder to exercise when you have such pain.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that? What do you think?
Yeah, for sure.
So I think, again, like, we're talking about these things, and I'll give it back to you, Jay, but this mercy context is, I believe, what sets us apart as Christians. Mm-hmm. Because there's no purpose to be merciful if you're not a believer, right? And so I think and I think Brad said this too, again, like as the Circle Rider community, right? We're probably more predominantly white, but we're growing in our growth to minorities. We're growing and diversifying in every capacity. John, you said this on the first one, and one of the points that I said is that, I don't want to be more diverse on the platform than in my living room. Yeah. And what I'm saying is I'm not saying that I don't want my platform to be diverse, because if all of my life is diverse, then my platform will be diverse. But it's not by almost making like, well, okay, I need to do 25% black and 25% brown and 25%, white and 25% Asian and get someone from, Native American. It's almost like it's so put together, and it's almost like, what is going on? But in our own life, right? In our own living room, or even in the living room of our heart and our soul, it's only one type of people. And I think it's so important for us to diversify that, because in the long run, if our hearts and our lives are diversified, it's going to trickle into everything else. Yeah. And so don't just diversify your living room and not your platform. Do both, but don't just prioritize one where you're seen and not the other where it's unseen.
Yeah, that's good. And I think even just in the part on mercy, I think, like you said, it's an opportunity that we have, as believers, as our CR community. This is not even, we can't put that expectation on the general population of the world, that is just processing pain. But for us, we can choose that, because that comes from a place of believing the best in our neighbor and believing that people actually can change,
Right.
So we're not living in the space of thinking that everything is what it is. People may change, we don't know, but we really do believe that there is a hope.
That's right.
And so it makes choosing mercy that much easier.
Yeah.
It makes forgiving people that much easier, because you can assume and really believe that people in their hearts, can change at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would even say, like, to tack on that, because sometimes we'll get that understanding, okay, mercy. And so then as, let's say, specifically for someone who isn't black, even if you're white, you're like, okay, I want to have this conversation. And then it's almost like, let's say I'm like, okay, John, we're going to have the conversation. But I'm not I love what Brad said, and you said this too, that first week. No one deserves to share their story with you. Mm-hmm. Does that mean, like, it's not, you don't,
no one's obligated.
Yeah, that's it. No one's obligated to share their story. So I'm building my friend. So we have 6 years, however many years of friendship. Yep. Like, so we have friendship where I could hit up John and be like, hey, let's talk, bro. I need your advice. I need your guidance. And we could talk, because we have genuine friendship that on any context, whether it's race or basketball, when I hit a 3 in his eye. Just kidding. I had to do that. I had to do it. Moving on. But we could talk on anything because we have a genuine friendship. But I'm not just going up to anyone that I have zero relationship with and be like, come on, now unpack your story. And that's where it's important. That mercy context is, people will be merciful with us, vice versa. But it's just so important to come into it with a lot of grace too. Yeah. Because we're dealing with real deal pain and trauma. And that's where it's like, don't be afraid to have the conversation. But also, if you ask your friend, hey, can we talk? And they're like, actually, no. That's not a time to push, but a time to trust and allow it organically to open up. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think that ties into the point of joy, the one that I forgot, but I remembered. Joy, because...
the intangible.
It implies that we have a hope in something.
That's true.
Like, I'm not in this moment looking at the current state of the world, of the U.S., and just thinking that, like, this is what it is, and just so apathetic about everything. Yeah. And, like, nothing's ever going to change. I love, I was just listening to MLK's final speech before he was murdered. But Or no, I'm sorry, wrong speech. The I Have a Dream speech.
Yeah. The Detroit or the DC one?
The DC one. He did give it twice. He gave it in Detroit first.
Shout out. There it is.
But in that one, he talks about the stone of hope out of a mountain of despair, you know? And so we're looking at what looks like a mountain of despair in front of us. But for the believer, for the Christian, and for the circuit rider, there is this stone of hope always, you know, that we can pull out of it. That's our treasure, you know, that belongs to the one that chooses to have faith in Jesus Christ, you know? And so to have this, the times, you know, the moment isn't joyful, you know?
Yeah.
The murders aren't joyful.
No.
The racism isn't joyful.
No.
But what is joyful is that we have like Yasmin was talking about last week, a solution in Jesus.
It's good, bro.
A solution in the cross, which is so complex. And the gospel is near to us, you know?
Yeah.
And it is something that we can grab onto.
Yeah.
And that has implications for 2020, you know, that it wasn't just something that was a solution for a moment.
Yeah.
Jesus wasn't one of the past. You know, the cross isn't something of the past that we just have faith in or believe in.
That's right.
It's of the now.
Yeah.
And it has a 2020 definition, you know?
Yeah, that's right.
It has a United States of America definition.
That's real.
And we can have joy in that.
That's real.
And that will influence how we interact and engage with the world around us, you know?
100%.
If we don't believe that, then why even talk about it?
Right.
You know, why bring it up?
Right.
Why not just live in it and just accept it as it is?
Yeah.
But we get to use our voice, you know, and we get to use our platforms. We get to use whatever spaces that we're in because there is a solution to the current issue. But if we never address that there is an issue, you know, if we never want to talk about the issue itself, then we can't talk about the solution to it, you know?
Yeah. I think that's powerful. And I think, again, just to bounce off what you said, right, in Psalm 16, it says, in his presence there is fullness of joy, and at his right hand pleasures forevermore. And so what we're saying is that, you know, even to the degree that we're in the presence of God is to the degree that we carry joy. You know what I mean?
Wow.
And when we say joy and happiness are two different things. Happiness is dictated by emotion, right? I feel good, I'm happy. But joy is dictated by Jesus. And so even in this conversation, even though there might be the world and through our physical eyes even look at, man, maybe, and sometimes like we feel so hopeless, we know through Jesus that we're joy-filled and hopeful. And I think it's like joy and hope are like twins that as we activate them together, it changes everything. Yeah, because we could be in the greatest despair. We could be in a place like even what happened with George Floyd and still to this day, I don't think I will ever recover because of how he was so wrongfully just treated and murdered. And just my heart breaks for it. In the midst of all that, we know that Jesus' heart breaks for it. And even with that joy and that hope, one thing I preach on, we don't have to touch on it, but I feel like there's this power as believers for empathy. In John 11, Jesus, when he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead, when Mary came to him and said, if you would have been here, he wouldn't have died. Even though he was going to raise Lazarus from the grave, it says it's that favorite verse we always memorize, Jesus wept. And it was his empathy that was just as strong as his activity. Yeah. And as Christians, we have lost in many ways, not all, that's a blank statement, but it's easy, I think, in these moments to lose our empathy and feel like, even as Yaz said, we're just going to preach the gospel. And if you know me, I love the gospel. It's my bread and butter. Every message I preach ends with salvation call. It's awesome. You know what I mean? Like, even if it's like to a room full of believers, I'm gonna smoke out that one, guy. Yeah, just in case. But we can't just blanket statement like, hey, it's gonna fix everything. No, we need to address how the system has hurt the black community. We need to address how all these things, but in the midst of addressing it, I'm still filled with joy. And I'm still filled with hope. Why? Because I believe that God actually has ordained you, right? No one created me to be half white, half Latino. Obviously my parents did, you know what I'm saying? But you know, like I didn't have that power. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
None of us had the power to decide when and where, but God has ordained us to be here for this moment, because I believe, I'm going off, I'm a preacher, millennial and Gen Z, we have the power to see this narrative change and go the distance. But that's why we have joy and hope. But in the midst of that, we could still have that pain and weep and still be mourning and still be angry, right? It doesn't mean we're perfect, but we're carrying this in because it's the gospel.
Yeah, that's good. And I think what's been really important to me and really important to the language of the couch and how we're developing it is like, we want these conversations to become normal, you know? I think it's so hard right now because we're not used to it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
A lot of black people are, but
Yeah. No, it's
for
real.
the general population of America, we're like, we don't have to talk. We haven't had to talk about racism, and we haven't had to talk about it consistently.
Right.
You know, but I do think conversation is a muscle.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
and whatever we choose to talk about,
Yeah.
it can get to a state where it feels most natural. And I feel like that's where we're at right now. We're kind of like on the line of that.
Yeah.
Deciding if we're going to push through this and just normalize the conversation on racism.
That's good.
And normalize being changed.
Come on.
Normalize changing our mind.
Come on.
And normalizing, you know, being perfected. Like we were talking about a few weeks ago, we are walking out our salvation, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so we can decide in a moment, yes, today, July 11th, 2020, I'm not racist anymore, you know?
Right.
But tomorrow morning, you got to make that decision again and live in a way that
It's real.
that is opposite and is anti-racist, you know? And
100%.
So
And even
we have to do this until it's uncomfortable now. We have to do it
until it becomes comfortable.
until it becomes comfortable.
And even treat it like, I think we've like, sin is sin
Yeah.
to God. You know what I mean? The consequences are different for each sin, but according to God, sin is sin. So it's almost like and tell me if this is right, we need to treat it like as if we would treat that we don't want to lie or we don't want to steal, you know?
Yeah.
And if it comes up or, you know, something happens, it's not the end of the world, but we're rooting it out. Or like you said, we can't just decide today's the day. No longer am I going to not have any racist things come up. No, we're going to be like, examine my heart, God. You know what I mean? Like examine it right now. Where if that does come up, I'm not too much in pride to say, man, this came up and I need to deal with it and then repent and then walk in the opposite way. I think, like you said, we need to get to a place right now for a lot of specifically white people, but especially if you're not in the black community, it's really normal to minorities, this conversation, because they had to carry it their whole life. It's uncomfortable, but like you said, we need to keep talking about it until it becomes comfortable.
Yeah.
And I think another thing, just practical, this isn't just a political thing either.
Yeah.
Like this is going to be on our life for the rest of our life. As if you're a circuit rider, we will fight for equality. Like we will fight for the black community. And again, we're not even fighting we're not saying black lives are better. We're not saying like we need to do that. We're saying like we need that equality. Like that's what we're fighting for. And so we're going to dismiss all the rhetoric, all the craziness, and we're going to say, no, we're going to fight together, whatever it takes.
Yeah, that's good. And I think it is important to look at the culture, you know?
Yeah.
I think I don't know, we have a current theology that kind of separates, you know, everything, like our spirituality and then the culture's over here. You know?
Yeah.
But I think it is important to look at the current culture because I think culture really can influence our decisions.
Yeah.
And influence our sins.
Yeah.
We can even talk about our culture now is so sexualized, you know, too.
Yeah.
Like there's so many ways where we even have to like safeguard ourselves against
100%.
because it's all over the place.
Yeah.
You know? And so I think we've assumed because the culture around us is racist.
Yeah.
But we're so different, you know, like
Yeah.
we're protected from that. But
Yeah.
it is so important to safeguard ourselves.
Yeah.
And set up checkpoints for ourselves and like ask yourself, am I being racist?
Yeah.
Or can this be a racist decision? Can this be
Right.
Could this be seen as racist?
Right.
Because the culture is feeding that.
100%.
And because our country itself is set up in a way that benefits, people who are white. you know? And so we have to look at the culture that is influencing us,
It's good, bro.
and make active decisions against that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like you're saying, and tell me if I'm repeating you right. When, not even if, when we find those tendencies in our life, that even that racism, that covert or even overt, whatever it is, like get rid of it so that we could walk in the right way and don't let it shut you down.
Yeah.
Right? Because culture is, as we look, even again, like we look at somewhere like Black Wall Street in Tulsa, right? Mm-hmm. And we think of like, man, like I even think back to even in school, I'm like, why didn't I learn more about that? Like that's just one thing, right? We could go on and on and on. We could go into all this stuff. And it's like, man, you look at in DC where you guys went to, and it talked about like a lot of Black history.
Oh yeah, the Museum of African American History.
And what we're saying, man, that's not just African American history. That's not just Black history. That's American history.
Yeah.
And so I think the more that we lean in and do that, and those are just super simple examples, then the more that we can address those areas.
Yeah.
Because think about that, all growing up, we've been inundated with more from the white culture. And so what we want to do is we want to see it until it looks like heaven, which is diverse, which is every tongue, every language, around the throne, right? Because it's kingdom. We're coming around the throne together. That's what we want to look like and see. And as we do that, like you said, we address those things, we rid them out of our life, and we move forward.
Yeah.
It's not like it doesn't just shut us down. No, we're like, no, I'm excited to find any area in my life so that I can look more like Jesus.
Yeah, that's good. I think we'll end this part of the conversation soonish, but I just want to recap a few things.
Do it.
And one of them is the point that we talked about earlier on about remembering, because even the Bible here that we've just been referencing a few times is so old,
Very.
but it's still so timeless and so relevant too. As we can read it and it feels like it happened yesterday,
right?
But it's history, and we're instructed to read it as if it's now, you know. But then we want to detach from things that happened 50 years ago,
right,
or 100 years ago, and
Come
say
on,
like,
bro.
oh, that was of the past. That's not important to us. It's not relevant. But our entire existence, theology, whatever, is based on something from thousands of years ago.
You preaching, bro. You keep going. Don't stop.
But I think it's important to note that, like, I just want to emphasize the point that we have to remember as a biblical command.
Yeah.
And even treat it as sinful when we don't remember.
Yeah.
Treat it as sinful when we want to forget the history that has informed our lives.
Yeah.
And we look at things like you were talking about, Black Wall Street, that happened not too long ago. We look at Jim Crow and these laws that were set up to separate Black people from the rest of America. These things were, some of these things were as early as 50, 40 years ago.
Some of the first Black church was created because he wasn't allowed in to sit with the white people.
Yeah. Black universities were started because we weren't allowed to be educated,
It's just
so, and this is all, it can feel so distant, but it is a lot, all of that is more recent than, than
wow.
this.
That's
but
a good point.
But we put so much emphasis on this, but all of this is a part of our history, a part of the culture that informs how we live, and we have to address all these things, And I also just want to, and whatever ending thoughts you have, I think it's just important again to emphasize this point of hope. The reason why we have these conversations, the reason why we are doing this series, the reason why we have such a stance and such a voice on the issue of racism is because we really do believe that there is a solution to it.
It's good, bro.
The reason that we can sit at the table together, the reason that we can diversify our rooms and feel comfortable in those spaces is because we have a Jesus that is in the midst of those same meetings, you know?
Come on.
And so I don't know. It's just it's so important to do this with joy.
That's real.
And like I said, with hope.
That's good. I think your point, bro, and I'll give it back to you for the final talks and just to pray us out. But that point that it's not that long ago is very important. I think I'm going to look to the camera. I think it's very important to take ownership. You said that, I think another thing you said with Brad, where you said where your ancestors were enslaved and some of his or however many of his could have been slave owners. Yeah. And I think just being like, man, like if that statement doesn't break your heart, don't get offensive. If that doesn't break your heart, and then we look at, segregation, wasn't that long ago? Yeah. Right? Jim Crow wasn't that long ago. When you look at all that stuff, it should press us to be like, man, I don't want to repeat those things, but I must know those things so that any area is not affecting my life or in my family line. And so I just think, again, like you said, I think, John, I'm so grateful for your voice in Circuit Riders, leading the couch. Yaz's voice, so many of Black staff and students and Circuit Riders. But I just think, again, like God is using your voice to, I'm just so grateful to even have these conversations with us. With me, even though I hit that 3 in your, why did I bring it up again? That's just cold-blooded. No, I'm just kidding. He's pretty good. He's going and moving on. But here's what I'm going to say. Here's what I want to end. Because I feel like, again, I think it would be fun to even do like podcast, or not even podcast, but even talk about, because we didn't even get into even break it down even more a little bit, but white privilege, systemic racism, Jim Crow. It'd be great to even talk through on another one, not even on a Monday, but even on a live, explaining those things and just getting a further greater understanding, right? But I'm a quote Carl Lentz, because he said these statements, and I'm just gonna give you these, and then I'm gonna give it back to John. But it was awesome because he was on a podcast that he was sharing, and he was talking about racism. And he just said, he goes, 3 things you must do to rid your life of racism, right? And again, no one has the corner on it, but he was just sharing. And what he was saying is he's saying, we need to treat racism like COVID. 1, we have to assume everyone has it. That's me. 2, we got to listen to the experts as well as people you don't agree with, specifically those in the Black community, Black people, Black experts. And the 3rd one is that we need to change your entire life to get rid of it. And it's maybe it's just for me, but when he said that, I just was like, wow, like that's so good. Yeah, we got treated like COVID. Everyone's got it, right? That means me, specifically me, right? That we need to listen to the experts, and we got to change our entire life to get rid of it. And I think we need to look at that 2020 was the surfacing of the pandemic of COVID and racism. And the pain of racism goes back way more years than COVID does. And we're not comparing what's worse or what's better, but we're saying, man, we need to get rid of that. And so I would just say my final statement's just shotgunning is specifically for our staff that aren't Black, right? That when we come into these conversations, what I try and do is we can't have a fix-it mentality. Mm-hmm. When you come in, don't give me all your ways on how you're going to fix a Black community or you're going to do this. No, we need to come in and learn. The second one, we can't have a here are the stats mentality. Doesn't mean that we can't have stats, but I want to care about the person, about you, about people. I want to care about your story more than I care about like quoting stats to you. Do you know what I mean? I want to hear your experience, even if it differs from my stats. And then the third one is we can't just be a silent observer mentality. I just think it's time for us all to speak, whether you're 18 or 88, wherever we're at, it's time for us to speak and to be an ally. And so my last 2 things, again, I said shotgun. I talked with another friend of mine. Her name's Naya. I work with her, and she said, she's Black as well. She says, pray about your role in all this. When she said, because I was talking with her and I was like, man, this is so incredible. She goes, pray about your role in all this. What is your true role in it? Not everyone is going to look the same, but we all have a role in it. And then the second one is, in conversation, is your heart posture to learn or to talk out of pride? What do you want to be in all this? A bridge builder or an agent? Do you want to be a bridge builder, agent of change? If so, you got to leave your opinion out of it. Yeah. And so again, I know I went through a lot, but I just feel like I feel so excited. I feel like it's time that we're moving forward in a greater way.
Yeah. That's good. I'm gonna pray, but before that, I just want to emphasize again to have these conversations in diverse communities. Have them with your family. I'll tell a quick story.
Yeah.
Because I was talking with my mom. This is my mother, so this isn't like my great grandmother. This isn't like some distant ancestor. She was telling me this is Chicago, Illinois. So she's growing up, and she said certain stores used to do what was called a brown paper bag test. And they would hold a brown paper bag like you would take for lunch to school up to your skin. And if you were darker than it, then you couldn't come into the store. If you were lighter than it, then like you were welcomed, you know?
Wow.
This is my mother, alive. I can call her right now. So again, a generation away who has stories like this. And so my challenge would be to like ask your parents or people around you for stories, you know? What were some of the things that they went through and even are currently going through?
Wow.
Because again, the culture is trying so hard right now to detach from what happened as if it was like forever ago, you know? Or as if people aren't still dealing with pain and that are alive today as well, you know? So I think it's just really important to normalize this conversation and realize that these are things that people are experiencing or still processing, you know, today. So we can, like we said, we'll continue these conversations, but if I could leave you with a challenge, it would be to do that. To lean in and to ask the hard questions and to hear the hard stories that are relevant to your family, you know, and your friend group.
Wow. Man.
But yeah, God, we do thank you for this conversation. We thank you for this community. We thank you that you, like we said before, are a God who does sympathize with our pain.
Yeah.
Who isn't distant from it. Who is very, very familiar with it. And so, Lord, my prayer is that we would become more like you, that we would, see the world and engage with the world in the same way that you do. I love the imagery of you, Jesus, interceding on our behalf in heaven still.
Wow.
And so we'll be ones that just press into the pain, be ones that talk about the pain, but not for pain itself, knowing that there is an answer to it, a solution to it, a man. There is a blood sacrifice. And so, Lord, I just ask that we would know what that means, how to operate in it, how to live in it, and that we be one to truly love our neighbors as ourselves. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Final Bible verse to leave us, Romans 8, you alluded to, verse 24. For in this hope we were saved. No hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what he sees? Verse 25, here it is. But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience.
Wow.
And I just believe as we end in this conversation that even that story, man, this is the first time I heard John share that story about his mom. That just breaks my heart. And I think it should break all of our hearts. And I think the beauty about the gospel, though, is that we're hoping for something we've never seen. So we're waiting for it with patience, but waiting isn't not doing anything. We're pressing in until we see that hope fulfilled. And so, again, thank you. Biggest thanks to you, John. I just think as a Circle Rider community and those watching in on this conversation, we're just getting started.